Today I'm going to talk about how to make your land hold water and the use of permaculture techniques around my homestead. The sun hasn't even come up yet, but about 2 weeks ago, my pond filled in 30 minutes. Huge monsoon. And just yesterday, maybe an even larger monsoon came through, totally topped off the pond to the point where it overflowed into the overflow. And then the overflow filled and started to dump into what was originally going to be a cistern just for horse water, until I found out my property line is a little different than anticipated. So right now, it's going to rain for quite some time apparently, so I know my top tank, I've got 2 IBC totes out at the shop, so I switched from the top tank to the bottom tank so it can fill that bottom tank now. You know, if I didn't switch over, I might miss out on a few hundred gallons of water. So these ditches that run around my property have more than one use. They can be both a ditch and a swell at the same time, because not only do they direct water, they hold water for 6 months to a year. Listen, rainwater harvesting or permaculture is a long game, recreating designs that the earth naturally creates. So I'm not saying my system is perfect, and we'll touch on some imperfections and how to fix them. The takeaway should be that you can manipulate your land to hold tens of thousands of gallons of rainwater in a climate that is definitely prone to drought. It's important to keep in mind that I've done almost all of this work with a simple shovel. I do not own a tractor, and I've only hired a couple tractors for a limited amount of time. I'm going on 6 years off-grid. I've had some of the largest monsoons in the past decade. None of my structures have flooded in any way, shape, or form, and that's because I redirect the water where I want it to go. That being said, if there's an issue, I solve it. And after having more rain now than ever before, I can see a few places which I already predicted would be ideal places to put ponds and whatnot, and that would completely eliminate any flooding on my homestead. As you can see, my driveway is holding a fair amount of water, so I can crown it and continue to improve it so it doesn't hold water at all. And there are a few locations on the property that hold quite a bit of water, and all I have to do is carve those areas out into larger ponds and then redirect so that they connect to each other. If they overflow, they eventually make their way out into the overflow system I already have, and that way I can divert it from my land altogether. An example, my driveway right here is holding more water than ever before, and that's simply because that large pond section that I plan to do is overflowing into the driveway. But once I dig that large pond, it will no longer do that. Not to mention, I do have overflow systems and whatnot, and so this isn't causing any issues for me, although this is probably the biggest rain I've ever had. So if you think about it, it would rain whether I was here or not. This same amount of water would hit the land and wash through. Now, holding it in the land will actually prevent erosion and other problems that come from that, and any water that overflows would have been there anyway, only less now. And so you're actually preventing problems further down the way. I just added this new swell the other day along the backside of the cabin, and there's already about 12 or 15 squash coming up in there. As we move this way toward the horse reservoir, you can see some flooding in this area here to the right. That area is eventually going to be a large pond, and putting that pond there will remove all of this flooding. Then you can see swells and ditches that go all the way out to the corner of the property, and this is my dry farming section. Here's a closer look at that swell filled up by the cabin. That swell also has this overflow along the side of the fence that will dump into the pond, and the pond has an overflow. So everything is accounted for. You can see that the pond filled so much that the overflow just outside of the fence is filling up. That's a good source of water for wild animals and a way to prevent any issues with my land and the land down the way. Many people voice a concern about silt in the water, but silt can easily be filtered out in a few hours. You could hang a bag that removes silt if you need some drinking water, so on and so forth. There's lots of ways to take care of it. I've just freshly dug a lot of these swells, and so there's more silt in them, and that'll eliminate itself to a large extent. And then you can put in a septic system styled filter that'll pull a lot of silt out, and it's just not that big of a deal. Having tens of thousands of gallons of water that you can use anytime in an area that doesn't have a lot of water is golden. Not to mention, all of the rain harvesting services, like the agricultural shed, the cabin soon, the shop, they harvest tens of thousands of gallons in their water cisterns, and that's completely drinkable, clean rainwater that I can then filter, and it's just another enormous amount of water, mostly reserved for drinking. As you're starting to see the layout of my land, like I said, it's not flawless, it's a work in progress, and it takes a long time. But you can kind of see that I'm going to have several different ponds that feed from one pond to the other, and that way a pond fills, it overflows, fills the next pond. It fills, it overflows, it fills the next pond. This is how you create a huge amount of biodiversity on your land and your own little ecosystem. These areas that absorb water, I've dug swells half this size that hold water easily for 6 months. I'll bet that this swell will hold water year round. And if you can imagine, that's massive in an area that normally doesn't hold any water. Now imagine this area, once I put in the largest pond, it's going to fill and just be an absolute blessing for my homestead. Even this reservoir out here is much larger than the pond by the cabin. And there's another space at the top of the hill there that would make a great pond as well. They'll all connect eventually. The only lined pond is by the cabin, and that's to hold water easily right out the gate. But all of these other spaces where the horses can play in the pond and whatnot, they should seal eventually because the soil is naturally about 30% clay, and then they're packing it down and potentially getting manure in there, and it's called glazing the pond. Just like in nature, they should eventually hold water. So this area that looks flooding, once I carve out a little creek from the pond to the next pond, it won't do that flooding anymore. They'll just simply look nice and neat and have a little connecting stream that run from one pond to the next. The main problem in desertous areas is erosion and the water just flashing through the land, and so creating pockets and areas for your land to hold the moisture and allow for foliage to start growing so that the wind can't even blow the dirt around. This is how you make your land hold water. And just to be clear, my land did not hold water before. The rain would come, it'd just kind of roll right through the property onto the next one, and now I hold tens of thousands of gallons of rainwater annually. So here you can see the pond by the cabin overflowing into kind of a wildlife pond, and then that's overflowing into what was once going to be a horse trough. So this brings us to this morning, where I already have my agricultural pond brim full. The pond by the cabin, brim full. The other areas of the homestead, absolutely saturated. And today, it's going to rain for several hours and do it again. The blessing here is it takes more time. I need a longer rain in order to hit the harvesting surface areas, in order to fill the 3,600 gallon cisterns that I've dug next to each of these structures. So that's a longer game. So I'm going to be able to top those off today. And now, if you can imagine, once I dig out that really large pond out on the pasture and that other little pond, and I'm going to do another at the top corner, and they're going to trickle down and overflow, and at that point, I'll probably have 30 to 40,000 gallons of rainwater harvesting and storage capability. That is about 3 years worth of water to supply myself, my gardens, my livestock. That's significant because I've never seen 3 solid years of no rain. And all you need is one real good monsoon for 30 minutes to an hour to fill the entire system. So just this morning, this had almost all drained. You know, there was a little bit in it. The driveway was completely dry, and now it's pretty well flooded again because of this large area that we're going to turn into a pond. That'll stop, and then all these overflows that are already in existence will clean up the entire situation here, you know. But the cabin and the shop and so on, they're nowhere near flooding. People often ask, hey, does your root cellar flood? Not one bit. There's plenty of space between there. It's never flooded whatsoever. Same with the geothermal. They have berms built around them, so that can't happen. You can see the water rushing into the pond here. And then the pond overflows over here. The pond is overflowing into kind of an agricultural, a wildlife reservoir here. And once this fills, it'll continue to trickle down into that hole. That was going to be a cistern for the horses. I was originally told my land went out to about that tree. And so I would have never touched that. But it can always just be backfilled at some point if necessary, which I doubt will ever be. So swells like this are designed mostly to hold water for these plants, but water will rush through them and overflow. However, most of the water will sit here and be absorbed into the earth. I have little sections like this that help to redirect water away from the cabin and into swells and ditches. This is a water recharge pit right here, which I'll dig down deeper later, but it's the lowest point of the property and it holds and absorbs a lot of water. So again, a closer look at this area that holds the most water on the land, and I'm going to just have to hire an excavator to come in here and carve out a big pond, and honestly, it could easily be 10,000 gallons or so, but I'll just have to look into exactly what I can do there. See, that pond up there can trickle down to this one, and there'll be another at the corner. And this can hold water. Horses can drink it. Silt settles quite a bit, just like in nature. But also, if necessary, I can make a way to irrigate my dry field here eventually. And so as these ponds fill and hold water, I could redirect water out here onto my field that's growing all kinds of different grass right now. Eventually, once I get this thriving, I can move this system out onto the pasture and break that up into 3 different pastures so the horses can graze throughout the year 4 months at a time. These carved out areas, these are called lunes, or these are called demi-lunes. And they're just carve-outs that hold water in these areas, and it's also a ditch and a swell. You know, it's mostly a ditch because it's directing water all the way to the pond, but it also holds quite a bit of water, so it functions like a swell. And then the demi-lunes, they are deeper down and hold a lot of water. Here's another example of a demi-lune, and these go down the driveway. And as you can tell, you know, the road could definitely be crowned some more, and I'll work on that down the road, and it'll continue to improve. But when I came out here, it was just dirt, you know. Incus loves the rain, and he's out here at his doghouse right now. But look inside his house is perfectly dry, and it stays really warm in there when it's cold, or a lot cooler when it's hot. And the spaces, until I build my barn, I've got hay stored around the homestead in areas that are on high ground. That hay doesn't really have any problems because the water doesn't get to it. You can see these areas for livestock also do not flood. This is my agricultural shed. It harvests rain and it goes underground to this 3,600 gallon cistern. This is my geothermal greenhouse. People are always worried if it's flooding. This is the heaviest rain I've ever had, And the small amount of flooding is just because, well, you know, I'm going to update this eventually, and it won't leak in here at all. But these little bits of water that come in, this is just like watering the garden. This is not really an issue. And this is the worst it's ever been. It's absolutely amazing what can be done to assist your land in holding water. And I just wanted to share with you guys, you know, I have a lot of followers and I get questions about this stuff all the time because it's just not possible for every person to catch all of the videos that explains everything I do. And I'm sure I missed 10 or 20 things here, but I just wanted to give you guys a pretty good overview of what it is and how it works and why I do what I do and why I call a ditch a swell and a swell a ditch and a, you know, it's all interconnected. I guess we better take a peek in the root cellar just to give you guys an idea. Of course, there's just a little bit of leakage, you know, but perfectly safe and all the food up on the shelves perfectly dry. And just like the cisterns, eventually I'll cover this entire mound in concrete and there'll just be no way for water to get in there with a better door on there. There's a free ultimate guide to off-grid living on my website, and right now for a limited time I've only got 5 kits left, but it's the Frugal Off Grid Everything Kit. It comes with my first hat ever, and I'm only doing it with the 5 last kits. There were 10. There's only 5 left. So you can snag that, get all my products, and a free hat.